Hello, this is Changing Economic World Revision. We're going to be looking at development in a nutshell. What is development? How do we measure it? What places are more developed and why? How do countries change as they develop? And how can we make a more equal world? If at any time you want more detailed information, I suggest you go to Planet Lacey videos on YouTube. Development means the progress of a country, mainly in terms of economic growth and human welfare, but it can also look at ideas of the use of technology and environmental quality. But the aim is always improving people's lives. All countries are on a journey of improvement and no country has arrived. We need to be able to measure development so we can tell how far along this journey of progress we are and to set goals of how to improve. The question is what to measure. Classically, we compare how wealthy countries are. And back in the 80s and 90s, we divided the world rather simplistically with a line called the Brant line into the rich north and the poor south, which we patronisingly called the third world. Things have certainly changed since then. Have a look at this map, which shows gross national income, GNI. GNI is what we use to measure and compare wealth. It's the total value of goods and services produced by a country, plus money earned from and paid to other countries. And of course, we put it per capita so we can compare countries of different sized populations. This map lets us classify countries into one of three groups. At the wealthy end, we have high-income countries, HICs, with a per capita income of over $13,000, and many will have incomes over 4 times this. These are the darker shaded areas on the map, so North America, Western Europe, Australia. At the other extreme, we have low-income countries, LICs, with a per capita income under $1,000, so less than a tenth of that of HICs. These are the lighter shaded areas on the map. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and remember Africa is not a country, there's huge variation within it, and some countries of Southeast Asia. The majority of countries today fall in the middle income category, shaded mid-blue. These are your newly emerging economies, your NEEs, which are seeing increasing wealth through developing their industries, and these include the BRIC countries of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the MINT countries of Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria and Turkey. Now, wealth is only part of the development picture. We must also look at social indicators which show progress in human welfare. We could use so many. We could look at infant mortality rate, how many children are dying under the age of 5, the number of people per doctor, the number of people that have access to clean water. We could look at the number of adults that can read and write, that's the literacy rate. We could look at the age that you're likely to live to, that's life expectancy. We could look at the number of phones per thousand of population, or the air quality, or male and female equality. Or we could even look at happiness with the happiness index. Usually, economic development leads to social development, but not always so, as in the case of Saudi Arabia and Cuba. Saudi Arabia is a hugely wealthy country based on oil revenues. Its GNI is $47,000 per person, similar to the UK, so we would expect all its people to have a good quality of life. However, the wealth is not evenly distributed across the population and is held by a few, and its social development indicators aren't as good as we would expect. So its infant mortality rate is 6, which means 6 out of 1,000 children die before their 5th birthday. In the UK, the IMR is 3.6, and the average age people live to is 75 years compared to 81 in the UK. On the other hand, communist Cuba is a poor country with a GNI per capita of $8,500, and we'd expect poor social development too. However, IMR is similar to the UK at 3.7, and people can expect to live on average to the age of 79. So it's most useful to use a measure of development which combines social and economic indicators to get a clearer picture of really how a country is developing. The UN has developed a really useful Human Development Index, HDI, that links wealth to health and education by combining 3 sets of data: life expectancy at birth, the number of years of education people have, GNI per head, and it gives countries a value between 0 and 1. So currently Norway has the highest ranking at 0.96 and Niger the lowest at 0.39. Of course, it's important to remember that the statistics are only as good as the data available. So some countries don't collect this data regularly, and so estimates need to be used. War and conflict stop data being collected. Governments might not want to release data. Also, GNI doesn't take into account money earned informally, which is very significant in some countries. The demographic transition model describes some of the social changes that happen as countries develop through plotting changes in birth and death rates. It's based on the experience of countries like the UK who went through rapid economic and social change during the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, but many of the same changes can be seen in industrialising countries today. And it goes on to describe population changes in post-industrial societies. There are 5 stages to the demographic transition model. In the first stage, birth rate is high because there's no contraception, people marry and start families when they're young. This high birth rate can be seen as a wide base to the population pyramid. Death rate is also high because poor diet, dirty water and little health care make people susceptible to infectious diseases, especially in early childhood. And you can see on the population pyramid that many people die when they're young and few survive to old age, giving a very concave slope to the population pyramid. The birth rate and death rate fluctuates due to disease, years of famine and feast, war and peace, but they cancel each other out, so overall the population hardly grows. Stage 2 is typical of an LIC such as Afghanistan today. The death rate, shown by the green line here, starts to fall because of better diet, hygiene, vaccination programs and some healthcare. People survive the big childhood killer diseases and are more likely to enter middle and old age. And you can see this in the straightening of the population pyramid. However, birth rate, shown by the blue line, stays high because these are largely agricultural communities where children are needed to contribute economically by working on the farm. It may also be culturally important to have large families, and so contraception isn't desirable even if it was available. Women in these societies are less likely to be educated and have little choice but to marry young and start families. And this high birth rate means that the population pyramid continues to have a wide base. Because birth rate is higher than death rate, the population starts to grow rapidly, as you can see on the red line. Stage 3 is typical of newly emerging economies like Brazil today. These are countries that are developing their industries so people are paid better, can afford to improve their standard of living through better diet, housing and healthcare. The government is also wealthier and can afford to provide clean water, health care and education. Death rates therefore continue to fall. At the same time, birth rate starts to fall and the base of the population pyramid starts to narrow. The birth rate falls because as women stay in education for longer and then have opportunities to work in new industries, they choose to marry and have children later. And as earners, they also hold more power to decide themselves about contraception and the number of children they want. Also, more children have the chance to go to school and they start to cost money instead of making money. So there are economic benefits of having a smaller family. Birth rate is still higher than death rate, especially in countries with lots of people of childbearing age. But as birth rate falls, the rate of population growth decreases. We in the UK are at stage 4, typical of a high income country. Birth rate and death rate have fallen to a low level and cancel each other out, so the population overall has stopped growing. Medical care, nutrition, sanitation are good, so people live to an old age, as seen by the squaring off at the top of the population pyramid. Women have as many career opportunities open to them as men and choose to work outside the home, start families later and have fewer children. Children and childcare are super expensive and so birth rate is low. Finally, some countries such as Germany and Japan are in the 5th stage of the demographic transition model, where birth rate has actually fallen below death rates and the population starts to shrink. Women have even fewer children on average as they choose other options, narrowing the base of the pyramid even further. At the other end, medical advances and improved standard of living mean people are living longer and the population becomes top-heavy with older people. This ageing population, seen as a bulge in the upper part of the pyramid, can cause problems as there are too few working-age people to support the elderly. What is clear is that development is uneven throughout the world, so why is this?
The physical location of a country will affect its economic and social development. So countries with plenty of fertile land for agriculture and a temperate climate will develop faster than other parts of the world. If countries are on navigable rivers or have ports, like the wealthy countries of Europe, they're able to trade and gain wealth. And it's no coincidence that some of Africa's less accessible landlocked countries, which are shown in white on this map, are also some of its poorest. Other countries are held back from developing by extreme weather. So the countries like Bangladesh and the Philippines in Southeast Asia get regular tropical storms. And then other countries like Somalia in the Horn of Africa and East Africa faced regular drought. These not only destroy crops and homes, they cause hunger, even death, and social disruption as people have to move from their homes. But they also divert money that could be spent developing the country to disaster relief, to getting people back on their feet again. Tropical areas are also more prone to diseases such as malaria, dengue fever, and Chagas disease. And when people get ill through disease or through undernutrition or through drinking dirty water, they can't work as hard and so are less productive, which limits the development of the area they live in. Often uneven development is due to historical reasons. One of the big ones was colonialism. Countries like the UK, France, Spain, Germany had colonies across the globe from which they took people as slaves and resources like gold. It's estimated between 1650 and 1900, over 10 million people were transported from Africa to North America to work as slaves on the plantations. And the Europeans grew wealthy on it, where the countries pillaged were left poor, subjugated, and unable to develop their own resources. And even after gaining independence, the legacy of colonialism has held many of these countries back. In some cases, the colonial countries drew up borders and created countries that ignored tribal, ethnic, and religious differences within the regions. And even today, this causes conflict, for example, in Nigeria, which deters investment in some areas and holds their country's economic development back and therefore their social development back.
There are also economic causes for the development gap. Lower income countries more often than not get their income from selling raw materials to wealthier countries like oil, copper, cocoa, bananas, and wealthier countries get theirs from services and manufactured goods like computers, cars, refined petrol, medicines. Turning raw materials into manufactured goods adds value, so higher income countries selling manufactured goods will get more money than lower income countries selling unprocessed raw materials. NEEs have realised this and have found ways to turn their raw materials into higher value manufactured goods, which has helped them to develop. On top of this, the price of raw materials fluctuates wildly depending on supply and demand. So if demand is high and supply is limited, LICs will be able to sell their raw materials for a high price. However, if demand is low or there's an oversupply, the price will crash and LICs won't make much money. On top of that, rich countries and international companies dominate world trade and use their power to keep the price of raw materials low so that they can buy them at a good price for them. And finally, well, poverty begets poverty. So if you're poor, you can't invest in the things that will help you generate wealth. So you can't invest in good transport or reliable power supply or good education or good health system. And so the cycle of poverty is perpetuated. So poverty is both a cause and consequence of uneven development. Rich places invest their wealth to get richer and poor places stay poorer and powerless to change, creating huge inequality in wealth between countries and within countries. It's estimated that just over a third of global wealth is in North America, whereas only 1% is in Africa. And within the African country of Nigeria, its richest man, Mr. Dangote, earns 8,000 times more in one day than a poor Nigerian will spend on basic needs in a year. In fact, worldwide, Oxfam estimates that 8 billionaires own the same wealth as 3.6 billion people who form the poorest half of the world's population. Uneven development also causes inequality in health. Poorer places tend to have more exposure to disease, for example through poor sanitation and water, not having mosquito nets, poorer housing, and also have less access to healthcare, fewer hospitals, doctors, vaccinations, medical equipment, treatment options. So more people are likely to die younger from preventable infectious diseases such as malaria and diseases of undernutrition. People in wealthier countries, on the other hand, tend to die later of chronic disease such as heart and lung disease, cancer, diabetes, dementia, diseases often linked to obesity. Uneven development encourages a flow of migrants too, from poorer areas to areas where there are more economic opportunities. This creates a brain drain in the source countries as the brightest and the best leave instead of helping their country out of poverty. On the other hand, remittances, that's money sent home by migrants, can be a major source of income for poor countries and help lift them out of poverty. We're going to look in this part at how we can close the gap between more and less developed places. These measures aim to break the cycle of poverty through creating jobs and income from manufacturing and tourism, through debt relief that lets countries keep and reinvest money instead of paying off debts, and by making sure countries are paid a fair price for their products. As income is created, money can be reinvested into the country. Investment in infrastructure and industry will in turn create more jobs and create more wealth as people spend money and pay taxes. And this can be fed back into the system to provide education and healthcare that leads to a better, healthier, more educated and more productive workforce.